of the night, I've been searching for moons, for an evil ogre in an ancient room. Was a fortunate son of the OSR. Without a 10-foot pole, I wouldn't get very far. The ground was murky and I caught a look as the dungeon master opened up his grim-toothed book. And then I fell into a spike pit. Oh yeah, a spike pit. Oh, a pit would have spikes in it.
I'm Colin Green, and you are listening to Spikepit. So, I'd like to welcome Jason Connerley of Nerds RPG Variety Cast to episode 300 of Spikepit. How you doing, Jason?
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Colin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And normally, on these sort of like 100th episodes or multiples of 100th episodes, I kind of do something retrospective. In a way, it's kind of retrospective, but also looking forward. Now, I know you've got some plans for running a campaign in the ancient Greek setting. So I thought, well, with that in mind, we could have a little bit of a chat about the 2006 movie 300.
Definitely. That sounds wonderful.
The thing that I discovered today that I didn't actually know about is it's also a graphic novel by, I think, Frank Miller.
It is. I've got it actually right here.
Ah, great. And
I think I do. It's in one of these drawers. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah, the reason I've thought that was interesting was for a couple of things. So my aim today, I'd like to tie this idea of the 300 together with our common interest of RPGs, and also talk a little bit about a comment you made in a recent podcast that you didn't like, or you sort of, I don't know if you was as strong as to say you hated digital artwork, but I thought this was interesting because with 300, you've got this Greek theme, you've got a graphic novel and a film that looks very graphic. I believe it was all filmed on like using green screen technology and stuff. I don't know. Do you know anything about the technology going on?
I could have at the time. When that came out, I drove about 5 hours to see that
Wow.
in like an IMAX theater because it was released in IMAX, and the really big screen, and so the closest showing was about 5 hours away. So I went and saw it in that, and it was funny because there were ladies. This group in front of me, it had to be some like a ladies club, and but there were these ladies in like 40s 50s, but they were all there to see now I'm having a brain fart here. The main actor's name, picture in my head.
The guy who plays Leonidas.
Yeah.
What
the heck's his name?
He's the gladiator fellow, isn't he?
Right. Jeez Louise. We'll find it here in a minute. Anyway, the
heartthrob guy.
Yeah, they were all there to see him.
Is it Russell Crowe? Is it?
No, it's not Russell Crowe. It is.
I'll get him.
Gerard Butler.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Gerard Butler.
Right.
So anyway, they were all there to see him, and so they're like, "Oh, there's Gerard. There's Gerard." They were like a Gerard Butler fan club.
Oh, right.
And they were in the row in front of me, so it was funny. But I think it was all green screen. Yeah, definitely. But it's interesting. So we'll come back. We'll loop back around after the discussion there when we get to the art. I probably should express myself better because what I meant was like the CGI animated art, like the early 2000s. You had a lot of cartoons, and there's still a lot of RPG products that have this computer generated art that's got that uncanny valley kind of effect because it's not quite realistic to be So we'll get into that, I guess. Let's not derail the wonderful discussion on 300 on this
No,
on
that's
this art.
fine. I mean,
Yeah.
looking at the film, I thought it had a very stunning graphic kind of. Well, it's got that whole tint to it,
Hmm.
hasn't it? That kind of. Well, it's kind of red, really. It's quite
Yeah.
reddish, super warm. Um,
Yeah. Which, interesting enough,
Not great sharp. There's a sharpness to it, isn't there? And
yeah, there is, and it's interesting because they tried to, they did a sequel to that. I don't know if you ever seen it, 300 Rise of an Empire, which is more sea battles after, after that battle there at
oh,
Thermopylae,
okay.
and so 300 Rise of an Empire is like a blue tint for most of the movie.
Oh, right. Was
It's
that any good? I'm not
uh
familiar with it. I hadn't seen it.
yeah, it's not. I don't know. It's okay. Now it has Leona Hensley in it again, and effectively the main villain's played by Eva Green, who's
Hmm.
a wonderful actress. It's okay. It's not great.
So you mentioned you've got the graphic novel.
Yes,
What
sir.
did you think of that? Because I'd heard that the film has actually got quite a few of the virtually the same sort of frames out of the graphic novel are taken and put almost directly into the film.
It does. It does. It's got a number of scenes that where the and so Frank Miller did the graphic novel, and
Hmm.
of course you might get some hate and discontent because he's pretty right wing, but
Oh,
regardless of
right.
that, or here American style right wing. But anyway, the he actually did a Batman graphic novel where Batman went and killed a bunch of Al Qaeda. This was about the same time frame, and DC wouldn't let him
Jeez.
use Batman, so he had to change, put a different character in it.
Wow.
Anyway, but let's get off. Let's not worry about the creator as much as the actual content. So the graphic novel is pretty stunning. Pretty decent. It's pretty simple. It doesn't. The movie has more nuance than the graphic novel does.
It's kind of gritty, isn't it?
It,
I
it
think.
yeah, it is. But the movie does think so. Zack Snyder's the director of the movie, and Zack Snyder is definitely another divisive character, right? But I apologize, but I got my dogs here, and
Yeah, no worries.
they're not as worn out as I hoped they'd be. But Zack Snyder definitely is a divisive character. I still think he did a great job with Watchmen, adapting that. And
Okay.
anybody that's read the Watchmen graphic novels and seen the movie, I think he did a great job. But so Zack Snyder uses a lot of speed up and slow down during 300, and a lot of the
Hmm.
scenes are almost like a freeze frame, are
Yep.
scenes right out of the book, like where they're pushing people off a cliff or different things. There are a number of scenes that are just direct, like and if you Google online, you can find where they do a screenshot like of the movie compared to the graphic novel, and you can tell that's the effect they were going for, and they did a good job.
It's
It's
almost
entertaining.
it's almost like that type of combat you get in like an old Batman animated series where there's almost that freeze frame. You see a
Hmm.
fist coming in from the side, and it's like a kaboom, and it's sort of like the fist comes in, and then it momentarily stops, doesn't it? You get like a frozen frame, and then the action carries on.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
it's, it's almost doing that.
yeah, he used that same kind of speed up, slow down in Watchmen, and then he's done a number of controversial films, but he kind of used that in Sucker Punch as well, which
Hmm.
is a little bit again not. Anyway, let's not get into a Zack
So
Snyder discussion.
what do you think about that art style? Would does that so bringing it around a little bit to RPGs?
Hmm.
Um, you hear quite a few people talk about gritty realism and kind of low fantasy, and this word gritty is always cropping up. Now, 300 is one of them kind of inspirations that when someone says gritty, it's something like 300 that pops into my mind. What would you have a similar sort of thought, or does something else pop into your mind with this idea of like a gritty realism or aesthetic?
Yeah, not so much 300. To be honest, when I think
Oh,
gritty, I
okay.
think, of course, I don't necessarily. I guess I think a different thing. And I don't necessarily put gritty in realism. So I'd have to think if I'm trying to think of what a gritty
Oh, okay.
realism is. Um,
Hmm.
I always get
Well,
tied up with the word gritty anyway because I I find in discussions with people, especially regarding RPGs, like a gritty RPG, we end up having different thoughts about what a gritty is. I mean, to me, a gritty is it's kind of a dirty world, a world that's not all black and white. There's a lot of gray in there, and the
Yeah.
players are probably, well, the characters definitely aren't. They may be heroes, but they're not guaranteed to win. You have to expect character death. You expect things to be really hard. I think
Hmm.
like Warhammer Fantasy role playing, like
I was
first or
going to
second
say that.
edition, is pretty.
Hmm.
Maybe not the
Hmm.
new ones. Definitely. So the new one they have, Age of Sigmar, is definitely not gritty RPG. But the old ones, the good Warhammer, first second edition, I think that is gritty.
Nothing contentious here, folks.
The well, Age of Sigmar is a superhero game. Effectively, you're playing, but it's funny because when you look at Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the miniatures game, the war game,
Hmm.
especially originally. Now they've tried to get more realistic and gritty, I guess you would say. But if you look at the old editions, there's nothing gritty about. I mean, there was, it was you
Well,
had
the
death, but it
chaos
wasn't
and the
gritty. It was silly. A lot of it. You look at the orcs and the,
yeah, I think I reckon like first edition, proper first edition was grittier, and then it went into second edition, and it got a little bit more. It, they kind of made the kind of orcs and goblins and stuff a bit more jokey, didn't
Oh
they?
yeah.
And then they sort of went back. It sort of fluctuates, doesn't it? It sort of goes from one. It's like a wave. It kind of goes up and down on the goofy scale, on the
Yeah,
goofometer.
my biggest, I guess the one I play the most, third edition, and that's the one I own. So maybe that's the one I default to. But yeah, it just seems, especially when you look at, like, especially, the machines, the orcs come up with these crazy gadgets, and and the way they've adapted them into 40K, or they did
Mm,
originally, at least. Again,
mm.
I know James Workshop is going back and forth on the grittiness of the setting or whatever, but
So I'm wondering if my sort of opinion on the grittiness of 300 is maybe informed a little bit by um, just knowing a bit more about Spartan culture and the way they kind of, because they're pretty cruel
hmm
historically. I mean, super cruel at 7 years old. Well, at birth, you know, the children are just checked over for any sort of weaknesses, and if they don't pass muster, they're abandoned and left out to die of exposure. And then at 7 years of age, you take the children away from their parents, and it's 12 years military training with basically what amounts to child abuse and beatings, and they're just kind of trying to push that survival of the fittest mentality to kind of create this kind of war machine. um, and so I'm thinking the grittiness is maybe I'm projecting some grittiness onto the film that perhaps isn't actually in the film. But they talk about it, don't
no,
they?
they talk about it in the film. They show that you have the one character that's exiled, and then you have where the boy goes and he has to fight the wolf, and they have like the flashback and shows that. And no, I think the film touches on that, and you're right. I mean, there's definitely we look back at some of the ancient cultures, whether it be Greek or whether it be it doesn't matter, any culture across the world. You look back, and we kind of have those rose-colored glasses to some degree. It depends on our culture and how we view that culture, but definitely there were dark sides to most cultures back then. Your Scandinavian countries had a history, unfortunately, sometimes of having to leave babies out when they had too many mouths to feed as well. They have a number of ghosts and ghoulies that are the spirits of babies that were left out to die, in Scandinavian folklore.
Quite famously, apparently, the Sparta had no walls around the city. They just regarded their people as kind of that tough and capable that their armies would be the wall.
By 650, BCE, they were probably the dominant land power in ancient Greece, and they were definitely a force to be reckoned with. But they didn't always win their battles. You go back and look through Greek history, and maybe some of this is mythic Greek history as opposed to historical Greek history, because they blend together a little bit, right? and I know a lot of the research I've done combines the mythic and the historical. And when you read the accounts, though, they're intermixed. The accounts from the period, even your historical accounts mix in mythic characters in the historical accounts. I guess where I was going with there are a number of battles where the Spartans do lose, and there are a number of times they do interact with the other city states and are defeated. So they're not like preeminent, unbeatable, but they're definitely a force to be reckoned with in one of the major armies of that period.
Hmm. So you mentioned your research, and that takes us round to this game you're running. Now, you mentioned, I believe it's Barbarians of Lemuria. It's one of your favourite systems. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about um, why you've chosen that system, and perhaps a little bit about the idea behind the game, and perhaps some of the research you've been doing.
Sure. So Barbarians Lemuria is a game that was written by Simon Washburn, who's a Brit, I believe. Yeah, and he wrote it 2009, 2008, that time frame. And he had read a bunch of sword and sorcery stories, and he wanted to emulate those stories, specifically Lynn Carter's stories that involved Lemuria and author Lynn Carter. And he was trying to get the rights for Lynn Carter's world. I think it's Thongor of Lemuria. I think I might have the wrong barbarian there. But anyway, he was unable to get those rights. Somebody else at some other company got RPG rights, and they ended up publishing a game that was super duper crunchy and complicated that just didn't work very well, which is a shame. But so Barbarians of Lemuria grew out of that. It's Thongor Lemuria, out of those novels. Which, to be honest, the novels, those aren't the best sword and sorcery novels. I'd push people other ways. But Barbarians of Lemuria, the basic mechanic is super duper simple. You have 2d6 plus your attribute. If it's combat, you add a combat stat. If it's a non-combat, you add appropriate career. So it's 2d6, the attribute, a combat stat or career, and you're trying to beat a 9. That's effectively a mechanic. It has hero points, so you can do some heroic things. You can bump it, roll up, so you automatically pass. If you roll 12, you can bump that up, and it has minion rules, so you can take out a swipe at people at once. There's a number of different things you can do with the hero points. But my favorite thing about the system is it uses careers instead of skills. So you have, say you're a sailor, and you have career points in sailor. You can do anything a sailor would do. You can navigate by the stars, you can tie ropes, you can drink heavily, you can swab the deck. Whatever a sailor could do, you could do.
And
And
that means it crosses over quite nicely through timelines and different genres, because you can say, well, a sailor, well, that could be a ancient Greek sailor, or that could be um, a naval guy in the 21st century.
definitely. And so I've used Barbarians Lemuria to play in a number of different genres. It does best with sword and sorcery. It has a rule. The way you get XP in that game is at the end of the adventure, you have to spend blow all the wealth that you've gathered. Kind of like the scene in Conan where they raid the tower and they come back and they spend all their wealth, and by the time the king's Max von Sydow's troops find him, he's like face down in a bowl of soup. You know, but so it's kind of like that idea, but and it makes heroic characters. It's kind of hard to do what I would consider gritty with that system because your characters are very, they're heroic. They're very competent characters. But I've played Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter with Barbarians Lemuria. I played Weird World War II with Barbarians Lemuria. They have a generic system out now for it. It's called Everywin, and Pete Jones over on Dragons Are Real has done a review of it. But it's a good system. It hasn't changed very much. There are free versions of the original system still out there legally, right there on the Barbarians Memorial website, and those are really close to the regular game.
So it sounds like it was a game that was designed to emulate that heroic telling of tales.
Yes.
Was that really what made you think, oh, that'd be perfect for the ancient mythological Greek vibe?
Yeah, recently been rewatching the Ray Harryhausen movies and things like that, and when you're trying to build characters in that and be able to do things, they need to be able to have that extra oomph. They need to be able to do those little heroic things, and Barbarians Lemuria lets you do that very well. And the other thing with a lot of those movies are they might have a special piece of gear or kit, but you're not worried about inventories and detailed encumbrance rules or anything like that in those worlds. You're not worried about money or any of that. So Barbarians of Moria works really well with it. And there actually is a mythic Greek source book for Barbarians of Moria. It's called Heroes of Helios. And I've got that. I'm actually using a number of different books in so I've got that. I'm pulling some things from that. D&D or AD&D back when TSR had it second edition had a Age of Heroes, I think it was named, when their historical series. I've got a book from Rollmaster Mythic Greece that I'm using. I've got a number of different role playing books or role playing source books. I'm kind of pulling parts and pieces from the different books, and then I'm rewriting the mythology a little bit. So when Hercules dies, it's implied. Well, I guess not implied. I mean, Zeus does bring it. So Hercules is kind of it. You got that mix where he's part human, part god, right? He's demigod, and
Hmm.
so when he ends up dying, they end up burning the body. But Zeus brings Hercules' mortal, I guess we'd call it a soul these days, up to Olympus. So in our campaign, he's actually been elevated, so he's a god now on the same level like as a Aphrodite or Athena, whatever. And so he's actually a player amongst the gods in our campaign, and that's going to affect the heroes as they move forward. So
All right. Have you actually done your first session yet, Jace? Or
we've done a session 0, which I
yeah.
highly recommend to everybody. Having players talk and collaborate together when they make characters is huge. It really eliminates the lone wolf characters and the people that and even if they're not intentionally making lone wolf characters, if you develop your character in isolation from the other people, you end up with things that are hard to pull together and explain why they're in a group together. Where if you work together to make your characters, you don't have those problems as often.
You got. I was just going to say you do seem to end up with a little bit more cohesion. For obvious reasons, I guess, because it's a bit more of a collaborative effort.
Hmm.
It depends on the players as well, I suppose, but I can see that. I can see, especially if you want a bit of a chance to explain your setting and manage player expectations, perhaps a little bit as well.
Right. Well, that was a big part here because I have a number of players that had not played Barbarians of Lemuria before, and we were using Mythic Greece, your Ray Harryhausen Greece kind of, your that kind of setting. But I definitely wanted to talk to everybody ahead of time, so this allowed us to talk about like Arlen Walker from Live at Pelham's Wastelands in the game, and he's playing Amazon. So we wanted to explain what the relationships of the Amazons were to the other Greeks and things like that. And so session 0 let us establish the rules of the setting.
Mm,
With
mm,
that,
yep.
and because the system was new to some people, and because we're kind of we're playing Barbarians of Lemuria, but there are a couple subtle shifts to more embrace the Greek theme. It was a good fit for us. If we were just playing, a standard game that everybody's played before in a set in the kind of a generic setting that everybody's played before, I don't know that it'd be as important.
So I've got this idea. You could do like a 300 one shot, and I was wondering how I would tackle that. So you've maybe got a 3 hour session, and you want to capture some of the flavour of these 300 Spartans on a beach defending this what amounts to a sort of 50-foot wide gap in the cliffs or whatever. It seems like there's potential there for some dramatic RPG moments. Would that be something that you would tackle yourself, or if you, I don't know, if you fancy doing that, how would you perhaps go about that?
I'd have to think about. I definitely think you can make an interesting session out of it, and I think that's a system where having something like it wouldn't have to be Barbarians Lemuria, but something like that where characters can do have the option to delve into hero points and do some heroic things is good because that way you get to make those moments happen. Where if you're playing, say, BX and you have a moment that dramatically would
Mm.
be important because we know the characters are all going to die at the end of the session, right?
Yeah, you've basically got 3 days. You've got three in
Hmm.
history. In history, you've perhaps got 3 days to play with, depending on where you start and where you finish, I guess.
Right. So you have to have those highs. and and I know this is going to sound horrible to a lot of people, but because you need those dramatic highs at certain points, you don't always want to only depend on the dice for that. So I think having a game that uses hero points, whether it's Barbarians Lemuria, whether you use Savage Worlds, whatever you use, you need some way to, to the players can influence certain roles.
Because it could just fall totally flat otherwise, couldn't it? It could be like round one, you all get like overrun.
Well, yeah, if you roll badly, I mean, even if so but I definitely, so you would pick people you'd want to have the combats, but you need more than just combat. So you need to have maybe a scouting thing, something where they could scout around to get intelligence, which might give them better chances in the next battle, or they might be able to cut off part of the enemy reinforcements coming somehow. I don't know. You would probably want a inspired by 300, inspired by Thermopylae. I don't know if you're just going to straight play Thermopylae. I I don't know. You could definitely do it, but I wonder. I would probably tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't given this a lot of thought, but I'm imagining you sort of play out scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So you like
Mm-hmm.
frame these scenes, and you play them out. And I don't know if you're familiar with a game called Final Girl.
I've heard of it. I've never played it.
Yeah, it's GM-less, and I think probably if you're going to run a GM-less session, something like this kind of subject matter is probably ideal. I don't see that it's the focus is on the 300, and we know the enemy is the Persians, and it's just like really this wave of Persians. If you wanted to make it more combat like, you could just kind of randomize the threats.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Final Girl uses this like a normal deck of cards, and you draw cards, and it's a sort of a bit of a yes and type of thing going on, and you kind of come up with this kind of cool story. I mean, it's collaborative storytelling. I was just thinking about this earlier today because we played together recently in the pit crew game, playing
Mm-hmm.
sorcerers and sellswords, Ray Otis's adaptation of Lasers and Feelings, and I enjoyed that so much. It's kind of sent me off on a little bit of a quest to do more of that style of gaming, because I really like the collaboration. And this, thinking about that a little bit more deeply, I'm thinking I've gone off of the concept of the GM a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Although I'll tell you a game that does that amazingly well. It does have a GM as of sorts. It's
Uh-huh.
Swords Without Master. I don't know if you've
Ah,
got.
yeah. See, you talked about it. I need to look back into that. Yeah.
So I
Have you-
I'll send you a link there, and I apologize to listeners. Maybe you can add it in post. There's a good podcast where there's an interview with the writer of Swords Without Master, and they explain. So the Swords Without Master is a sword and sorcery game. It's about as close to a storytelling experience as it is a role playing game. You do roll dice every now and then, but it's more to establish the mood than to establish whether you succeed or not. But it was published in volume 4 issue 3 of Worlds Without Master, which is like a zine or magazine, and you can get this on Drive Through RPG or wherever. But the way he wrote the rules, he wrote them as like part of a story, and it's kind of hard to parse the rules. But there's an interview he did on a podcast where they explain how to play the game, and it's really much simpler than it reads, and it works really well. So I'll get you that link so you can include it in the show notes of how to play it. But I think it would work well for this as well. But the way you ran Sorcerer and Sellswords worked. I think you could do it that way too.
what with the sort of random character generate? Oh, I'll do the
No, do the
300.
300 thing. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't do, you'd make them characters ahead of time. But no, I just mean maybe not exactly using swords, but the way you ran that session where, because we effectively did scenes, and
Yeah,
you did the important part, then you cut to the next part. We didn't waste time on the in between parts or, you, you know.
yeah. I mean, maybe my brain is just unconsciously making links to my recent experience of that. I think totally true. Oh, and there you go. Once again, we're talking about that kind of that link between perhaps Greek mythology and swords and sorcery, I mean, they've got some sort of shared vibe going on there. I guess the folk who were writing some of the swords and sorcery stuff were looking to Greek mythology for their inspiration in their writing, I guess.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sure they were. You would think it's interesting. I talked to Shandy Andy in a recent podcast about this. We talk about. I actually mentioned the sessions there. We've actually played the first session of my game as well, and I interviewed Shandy Andy of On Guard Treasure B52 podcast about our session after the first session, and we talk about this how when we were growing up, Greek mythology and to a lesser degree Norse mythology were the big mythologies, and everybody pretty much knew them. Where these
Hmm.
days, with comic books and role playing games and all these other things coming in, I I wonder how many kids really know. I mean, they might know the Disney version of Hercules or something, but do they? They're not near as well versed in these older mythologies as they were because you have the comics and you have Magic the Gathering and you have whatever else, right? Or manga or the cartoons and the so I think to some degree the Greek mythology isn't as popular as it used to be. But definitely, you think about the time of Robert Howard in the 20s, what of course he's gonna draw on it, or I'm not but you know what I mean? Because he doesn't have
Yeah,
all these other things to
yeah.
pollute the environment.
The kids are spoilt for choice in terms of
Mhm.
media that they can consume. I remember going down to the library, rifling through books to find anything on um, mythology. It was normally Greek mythology, but my mum would say, we'd go off to school. My mum would say, "Oh, she's going into town. She's going to the library. What books do you want me to see if I can find?" And I'd always be like, mythology, anything on mythology. So I'd get these old books, and the books were not like the books you get today. They were not lavish. They were fine. The books now that you get is amazing. The richness of images that you get, the kind of clever presentation. It blows my mind, really. I'd just like to thank Jason for joining us today, being a guest on episode 300. Any last words, Jason? I always think this is a strange thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Anything you'd like to add? Chuck a plug in or whatever?
No, I don't think so. I thank you very much for having me on the episode, and as you know, I've, supported you and your endeavors for a long time. I look forward to doing so in the future. I'm excited for what content you have now as you go into your third century of episodes, right? I know that's not the right way to say that, but
yeah, well, it is. I guess it is. It's going that way. No plans to pack it in the near future. You'll all be disappointed to know.
yeah.
uh, but yeah, thanks for joining us, Jason. I'm going to give a big thanks to the pit crew, of which you're a member, but their ongoing generous support, keeping me going and growing, and reserve the last thanks to you, the listener, for taking a bit of time out of your day to listen to Old Spikepit. And on this occasion, Jason Connerley of Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Take care, and I'll catch you later.
I fell into a spike pit. Oh yeah, a spike pit. Oh, a pit would have spikes in it.